Lakota chief's old bow was broken in the last hunt. A widow restrung it and was given a home. The bow was in two pieces when I came home from the last hunt. The crack had happened fast. One moment it was whole and strung, the next it had split lengthwise along the old repair I'd made years before, the sinew and pine pitch finally giving up after what must have been 20 years of holding. The sound it made was small, not loud at all, like a twig breaking underfoot in dry autumn, and then just the two halves in my hands, the bowstring hanging loose off the end of one piece, swinging. I stood there at the edge of the Broken Horn ravine. The horses were moving past me toward camp, the men coming in from the day, the light already going low and yellow over the plain to the west. I just held the two pieces and looked at them. Hawk Wing saw. He is my sister's son, 31 years old that fall, broad across the back, strong the way young men are strong, which is to say without thinking about it. He saw me holding the two pieces and he did not stop walking. He didn't say anything. Later, at the end of the afternoon when it was time to mount up for the ride back to camp, he helped me onto my horse. The way you help someone who is no longer fully capable, carefully, with courtesy which is worse than contempt. That moment, Hawk Wing's hand under my arm, guiding me up, that stayed with me longer than the bow. I am called Broken Elk now. I was not always called that. When I was a young man I was called Charging Elk, which my father gave me after a fight with 3 Crow warriors near the Tongue River when I was 19. I took an arrow in the hip and kept fighting. For a while after that I had other names too, things men called me in admiration or in fear, but those names fell away as the years piled on, the way things do, and I became what I am now. Broken Elk. My own people called me that without cruelty. It was just what I was. A man who had carried a great many things and set them down, one by one, until what was left was the man himself, sitting beside a fire. I will tell you about the bow first, because everything else comes back to the bow. My father made it. Not all of it, he started it and I finished it the year after he died. He had been working on it for 2 winters, selecting the wood, shaping the limbs, and when he died in the spring fever that took 6 people from our band that year, the bow was not finished, not strung. Just the shaped wood wrapped in rawhide at the grip, the ends carved and notched for the string. He left it in my lodge the night before he died. Not deliberately, he didn't know he was dying, or if he did, he didn't say so. He just set it against the lodge pole and went back to his own fire. I found it there in the morning after. It took me a year to string it. I kept it wrapped in deer hide. I worked the sinew slowly, twisting it the way he had taught me, adding length by length until the string was the right weight for the pull. I remember the morning I first drew it back. I was in the trees at the edge of a meadow, the grass still wet, and I drew it back and held it for a long count and let it down again without releasing, just to know it was whole. I used that bow for 37 years. You understand what 37 years with a tool means. It is not a tool anymore. It is your hand almost. You know every particular of it, the slight lean of the upper limb, the way the grip has worn smooth where the thumb sits, the sound the string makes when you draw it back, low and tight like a held breath. I knew that bow the way I knew my own body, and my own body had been failing for some time, so maybe that was fitting. The last hunt was Hawk Wing's idea. There are still some buffalo, not many, nothing like before, nothing like what I remember from when I was young and the herds moved like dark rivers across the plain. But there are a few small groups that come through the eastern grasslands in October still, if the season has been good, and Hawk Wing had scouts who told him there was a group of 30 or 40 moving south along Ash Creek. So he organized a hunt. 6 young men, fast horses, and me. I don't know why he asked me. Courtesy maybe, or he thought it would be good for me. I am 64 years old, not ancient, not yet, but my hip where the arrow went in 45 years ago aches in cold weather, and my eyes are not what they were. I can still draw a bow. I can still ride. But I am not fast, and the kind of hunting Hawk Wing likes, riding hard alongside a running animal, drawing at full gallop, I am past that. I should have said no. But when Hawk Wing came to my lodge in the early morning, still dark outside, and said that he wanted me with them. I got up and got my bow and my horse and went. The ride to Ash Creek took most of the morning. We found the herd where the scouts said it would be, a group of maybe 40 animals, moving slow in the cold, their breath visible in the air. The young men were already alive with it, already leaning forward on their horses, and I watched them and felt something that I can only call grief, though it wasn't quite that. It was something older and more complicated, watching them be what I used to be. We split. Hawk Wing took 3 men to the east flank. I rode with 2 bears and a young man named Lame Crow, 18 years old, the son of a man I had known well, to circle wide to the south. The plan was to press the herd north into a long meadow where the ground was flat and the shooting would be good. I was riding wide, not fast, just holding position, when my horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole. He didn't go down, he caught himself, lurching hard, stumbling forward on his knees for a step before he got his legs under him again. But the lurch snapped me forward and I grabbed the saddle with my right hand to keep my seat, and my bow hand, my left, came down hard on the horse's neck, and I felt the bow strike the saddle horn. The pop. The 2 pieces. I got the horse calmed. I sat there a moment. Then I put the broken bow across my thighs and rode the rest of the hunt without shooting. 2 bears killed a young cow. Lame Crow shot twice and missed. Hawk Wing's group got 3 animals. I sat and watched. It was a good hunt for what it was. On the way home, I held the broken bow in my lap. I turned the pieces over. The crack ran right along the old repair, a place where the wood had split years ago, and I had worked it back together with sinew and pitch, and it had held perfectly for a long time. Now it was done. That night in my lodge, I laid the 2 pieces on the hide beside my fire. I looked at them for a while. Then I put them in the corner behind my blankets, wrapped in the deerskin, and I did not touch them again for 3 months. I live on the eastern edge of what used to be my people's territory, on a piece of land beside a creek they call Clearwater Creek now, the white name, not the old one. The old name meant something about the sound the water makes in spring when it comes down fast over the limestone, a specific sound, but I have given up expecting people to know that. I have a small cabin there. I built it partly. 2 of my sister's sons helped me with the roof timbers, but mostly I built it myself over a summer, working slow, working careful. It has 1 room and a good stone fireplace and a porch facing east where I sit in the mornings. My people are scattered. Some are on the reservation to the north, some have moved to the town. A few, like me, are in between, not quite one world and not quite the other, living in the spaces. I have nephews and nieces who come through. I have a small herd of horses, 8 of them, that I run on the eastern pasture. I trade sometimes, horses mostly, occasionally knowledge of the land, occasionally my labor in a neighbor's harvest when I am willing and they are polite enough to ask properly. I am not poor. I am not lonely in the way some men are lonely, but I had been alone, genuinely alone, the way you are alone when you have outlived the people who knew your whole self for 5 years since my wife Brightwater died. She died in the winter of that year, a lung sickness, the kind that comes fast, 3 weeks from the first cough to the end. I had done everything I knew to do, and it hadn't been enough. After Brightwater, I was a different kind of man, not broken exactly, but quieter. The parts of me that had been hers, the laughing parts, the parts that could be caught off guard and delighted, those parts went somewhere else. I still functioned. I still got up and fed the horses and made my fire and ate and did the day's work. But there was a quality to it, like doing everything at a slight remove. The bow in those 5 years was still whole. She came in November, about 3 weeks after the first snowfall. I saw the wagon from my porch in the early morning. It was moving slow along the road, slow the way wagons move when something is wrong with the horse or the load or the person driving. I watched it for a while. Then I got my coat and walked out to the road. It was a woman alone. The horse was a gray gelding, old, not much left in him. The wagon was a farm wagon, the kind you use for hauling, not for traveling. She'd loaded it with what looked like everything she owned, which was not much. Furniture wrapped in canvas, a trunk, a crate of kitchen things. She sat on the bench in a dark wool coat, her hair pinned up under a plain hat, and she was looking at me without alarm. Just looking, the way a person looks at something they are trying to determine is a danger or not, and have decided probably not. She had a cut on her chin, almost healed. Her hands on the reins were steady. I asked her where she was going. She said she didn't know yet exactly. She had been at a farm 12 miles east, her husband's land, but her husband had died of a fever in September, and his brother had come for the land within 6 weeks of the funeral. There had been a paper, she said, something her husband had signed before they married that she hadn't known about. She'd had to leave. She said all of this plainly, without self-pity, the way you describe geography. Her name was Clara Voss. Her husband had been named Theodore. They had been married 11 years. I asked if she had somewhere to go. She said she had a cousin in a town 40 miles west, but she wasn't sure of the welcome. She'd been sleeping in the wagon for 4 nights. It was 4 degrees above freezing, maybe. The sky had the gray weight of more snow in it. I told her to bring the wagon around to my barn. She looked at me for a moment, a steady look, taking measure, not grateful yet, not cautious, just assessing, and then she brought the wagon around. I don't know exactly what I intended when I told her to come to my barn. Shelter for the night, I think. A meal, a warm place for the horse. Then she could go on to her cousin or wherever she was going. I was not a man who took in strays out of sentiment. I had seen too much of how those arrangements went wrong, how generosity could be mistaken for something else or could become an obligation nobody wanted. But she wasn't a stray. That was the thing I understood before she even climbed down from the wagon. There was a quality to her, a settled quality, like a person who has decided what they are and what they will do and simply does it. She helped me unhitch the gray. She checked his hooves without being asked. She knew what she was doing around a horse. I gave her the tack room to sleep in. It had a small stove, which I lit for her, and it was dry and tight against the wind. She thanked me directly without excessive courtesy. She made her own supper from things she had in the wagon. I came back later to check the stove and saw through the window that she was mending something by the light, a piece of harness leather, sitting cross-legged on her bedroll, working with an awl and a heavy needle, her head bent. She didn't know I was there. I went back to my own fire. She was still there in the morning. She had fed the horses. She had brought in wood for the barn stove. She was splitting kindling outside the back door using my hatchet, and she was good at it, clean strokes, working the grain, not wasting motion. I did not tell her to leave. I didn't tell her to stay either. We just fell into a kind of arrangement. She took over the cooking, which she did without fanfare and which was considerably better than what I had been doing. She kept the barn, which had gotten untidy over the years in the way things get when you live alone, and the effort of tidiness seems beside the point. In exchange, she had the tack room and her meals and shelter for her horse. Neither of us said these were the terms. We just understood them. This went on for 3 weeks before either of us acknowledged it out loud. In those first weeks, I learned a few things about her. She had grown up in Nebraska. Her father had kept horses, not many, maybe a dozen, and she had learned to work with them before she could read. She knew leather work. Her father had done his own harness repair, and she had watched and helped until she could do it herself. She knew how to judge a horse from 20 yards, from the way it carried its head and the rhythm of its walk. She and Theodore had been on the eastern land for 7 years, and in those 7 years she had done as much of the work as he had, maybe more, because Theodore had been a good man but not a strong one, not in his body. She didn't speak of Theodore with bitterness. She spoke of him the way you speak of a weather event, something that happened that shaped things. That was what it was. She missed him, I could tell, but grief was not her primary condition. Her primary condition was capable. I started to attend to her. Not watch, that is not the right word. Attend. The way you attend to something that is there in a way that modifies everything else. I would hear her in the barn in the morning, and that sound would be different from the sound of an empty barn in a particular way. I would come in from checking the east pasture and smell something from the kitchen. She had moved her things into my kitchen after the first week, with my tacit agreement, and that smell changed the quality of coming inside. Not dramatically, just differently from before. I did not put words to this. I am not sure I needed to. One evening in early December, she asked me about the horses. Not about trading them, not about their value. She asked about them in the way that people ask about things they are genuinely interested in. She wanted to know where they had come from, which ones I had bred, how I managed them through the winter. We sat at my table for 2 hours and talked about horses, and it was the longest conversation I had had with anyone in a long time. I told her about my roan mare, the one I called Black Mud, who was difficult in a specific way. She didn't spook, she didn't bite, but she had a thing about crossing water that no amount of work had fixed. I had been trying to work on it for 2 years. Clara listened to this and then asked a few questions about how I had been approaching it, and then said she'd had a horse like that once, that her father's best gelding had been the same way, and she described what her father had done. It was different from what I had been doing. I didn't say so, but I filed it away. The next morning I tried it with Black Mud. It worked better in 1 session than 2 years of my approach. I told her this at supper. She smiled, not triumphant, just pleased. A real smile, the kind that's not performed. It changed her face. She had a narrow face with dark eyes, and she was not beautiful in the way that draws a room's attention, but when she smiled, it was something particular to her, something that only came when she meant it. I thought about that smile longer than I should have. She found the bow in early December. I had gone to town 8 miles, a half-day ride for some things I needed. Nails, a new file, flour. I came back in the late afternoon, and she was sitting at my table with the 2 pieces of the bow in front of her. She had unwrapped it from the deerskin. She was turning the upper limb in her hands, looking at the crack, tilting it toward the window light. I should tell you what I felt when I came through the door and saw that. It was not anger. It was something more complicated, like being seen in the middle of something private, like she had found a letter I had never shown anyone. I set my things down. I didn't say anything about her having gone through my things. It was a small lodge, and she was there every day, and I had no reasonable expectation of complete privacy. But I stood there looking at the bow in her hands, and something in my chest went tight. She looked up. She saw my face. She set the bow down carefully on the hide. She said, "I'm sorry. I was cleaning and I found it in the corner. I didn't mean to pry." I told her it was all right. She said, "This is very old work, your father's." And I didn't expect that. I didn't expect her to see that. The work on the grip, the specific way the rawhide was wrapped at the handle, that was his style, his particular way of doing it. You would have to know a great deal about such things to recognize that the lower part was made by one man and the upper part finished by another, years later. But she had seen it. I told her yes. She picked the upper limb up again. She ran her thumb along the crack lightly, feeling the texture of it. She turned it and looked at the notch where the string attached. Then she pressed the 2 pieces together end to end, gently, studying how the crack aligned. She asked if I had sinew long enough to restring it. I said, "The bow is cracked." She said she knew that. She said she wanted to look at the crack properly before we talked about what could be done. She said we. I sat down across from her. I got the sinew from my kit. I had good sinew, twisted in the old way, kept oiled. I put it on the table between us. She held the 2 pieces of the bow and pressed them together end to end, studying the alignment. She looked at the crack from both sides. She tilted it toward the lamp. She said, "It hasn't split all the way through. Do you see here the back face is still connected? Just barely, but it's there. That's the sinew backing holding it." I leaned in. She was right. The bow was sinew-backed, the way the old ones were, and the sinew on the back face had not let go. The wood had cracked clean through from front to back, but the sinew backing had held the two halves in their position like a hinge, together and apart at the same time. She said, if you work fresh sinew into the crack, seal it right, wrap it tight and let it set, it'll hold. Not forever. But it'll hold for years if you don't stress it in the cold. I looked at her. She said, quieter, my father worked bows. He wasn't Lakota, he didn't know your ways specifically, but the craft of it, sinew work, wood selection, the repair of things that were worth repairing. He taught me some of it. I know it's not the same, but some of the craft is the same everywhere. I said, show me what you're thinking. What she did next took most of that evening, and part of the next morning. She started with the sinew, thin strips she wet and worked between her fingers until they were pliable, almost alive, and then she began feeding them into the crack with a thin piece of bone, pressing them down layer by layer, patient and meticulous. She worked in silence mostly. Sometimes she described what she was doing in a plain way, not teaching me, not explaining for the sake of explanation, just thinking out loud, the way you narrate your own hands when the work is delicate and you need to hear what you're doing. I sat across from her at the table and watched her hands. Her hands, I should say something about her hands. They were not soft hands. They were working hands, capable hands with a scar on the right palm where she'd grabbed a hot iron years ago and with the nails kept short and the joints slightly thickened from years of cold and labor. But they were sure. Every move she made was sure. She worked the sinew into the crack the way a person works who has done similar things for a long time and knows the material. No fumbling, no second-guessing, each motion deliberate and final. I had made and repaired bows my whole life. I knew this work, and watching her do it, watching her handle my father's bow with the same care and sureness I would have brought, there was something happening inside me that I could not quite name. Not gratitude, though that was part of it. Not attraction, though that was somewhere in it too. Something more like recognition, like meeting a person who speaks your language in a place where you have been speaking around each other for weeks. She paused once, looking at the upper limb, and said, "Tell me about the last hunt." I told her. The stumble, the prairie dog hole, the saddle horn, the pop. Hawk wings hand under my arm. She listened without looking at me. She kept her hands on the bow. When I finished, she said, "The bow didn't fail you. You were unlucky." I said, "Maybe." She said, "A man's body changes. That's not the same as failing." I didn't say anything, but I heard her. I heard it the way you hear a thing you've known but haven't wanted to say out loud. She finished the sinew fill that night and bound the crack with a careful wrapping, tight, even, slightly more pressure on the outside curve where the stress would sit. She said we needed to leave it for at least 2 days, 3 better, near the fire where it could dry slow and even without too much heat. I set it up on the shelf by the fireplace. I watched it from my chair that night, the wrapped crack, the sinew drying, my father's bow. 3 days later, she strung it. She tested the limb first before she put the string to it, just pressing the upper limb carefully with both hands, feeling how it responded, checking that the repair had set clean and even. Her face while she did this was concentrated, almost still. She was reading the bow through her hands. Then she cut the sinew to length, twisted the loops herself, seated them on the notches. She drew it back slowly, feeling the weight come up through the draw, checking the limbs for any wobble or uneven pull. She held it at 3/4 draw for a slow count. She handed it to me. I took it. I seated the grip in my left hand, my thumb on the worn smooth place my thumb had worn for 37 years. I drew it back. It was not exactly as it had been. There was a slight difference in the feel, a small amount of give in the upper limb, the crack having changed something in the dynamic, however slightly. But it was whole. It was strung and it drew cleanly, and the limbs were true, and the string sang when I released it against my forearm. I held it at full draw for a slow count of 8 and let it down. She was watching me, not anxious, not waiting for approval, just watching. I put the bow on the table between us and I said, "You did this well." She looked at the bow and then at me. She said, "I wanted you to have it back." Such a plain thing. But the way she said it, not "I wanted to help you," not "I thought I could fix it," not anything about her skill or her effort. "I wanted you to have it back." Like the bow was mine and she understood it was mine, and she understood what it meant for it to be gone, and she had simply done what was in her to do so that I could have it back. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Why did you stay here?" She looked at me, not offended by the question, not deflecting from it. She considered it honestly. She said, "Because it's worth staying." I said, "The tack room is cold." She smiled, the real one, the narrow-faced one that only came when she meant it. She said, "It's warmer than the wagon." I want to tell you how things were in those weeks of December and into January, so you understand what I mean when I say she was there in a way that changed things. She was not deferential. I want to make that plain. She had her own ideas about how things should be done, and she stated them without apology. She had opinions about the horses, about the barn, about the order of the winter work. Some of her opinions were wrong, and I told her so. Some of mine were wrong, and she told me so. We did not have arguments exactly, but we had negotiations, clear exchanges where each person said what they thought, and neither one retreated from their position without a reason. I had not had that in a long time. Bright Water had been different. She had agreed with me more readily than was perhaps always honest, though she was her own person in other ways. Clara Voss did not agree with me until she had a reason to, and something in me that had gone quiet woke up in those negotiations. Some part of me that needed not to be agreed with, but to be taken seriously, to have someone engage with what I thought as if it mattered. She was interested in the horses in the way I was interested in them, not for their value but for what they were. She had favorites within 2 weeks. The young blood bay colt she had started calling Redstone, though I had not named him. The old dun mare who was difficult to halter. She had a way with the dun mare that I hadn't had. The mare had always pulled back, always caused trouble at the gate, and Clara figured it out in less than a week, using an approach I hadn't tried. She didn't explain how. She just started doing it differently and the mare stopped fighting. I noticed this. I noticed all of it. In January, a hard storm came down from the north, 2 days of driving wind and blowing snow that kept us inside. We burned through wood at a rate I hadn't planned for, and by the second afternoon the pile at the door was getting short. I put on my coat to go out and cut more. She put on her coat and came with me. We cut wood together in the driving snow for an hour, neither of us saying much, just working, taking turns with the axe. When we came back inside, we were both red from the cold, and she made coffee and we sat by the fire and drank it, and she said out of nowhere, "When you were young, was it different? The land, I mean." I told her yes. She said, "Tell me." And I told her. I told her about the land as I had known it when I was a boy, the herds, the grass, the quality of the sky in the season of long days, the way the country had been. I hadn't talked about it in a long time. I usually didn't. The telling of it felt not like grief exactly, more like opening a room you had sealed up and finding it still intact, still warm. She listened for a long time. She asked real questions, the kind you ask when you are genuinely curious, not just being polite. She asked about the horses, about the hunts, about the ceremonies, about how decisions got made in the band when there was a disagreement. She asked about my father. Eventually she asked about Bright Water. On that last one I paused. She said quickly, "You don't have to." I said no, her name was Bright Water. She died 5 years ago. And I told her a little, not everything, but something. The kind of woman Bright Water had been, the quality of her laugh, the way she had been with the horses, how the lodge had felt when she was gone from it. Clara listened. When I stopped talking, she didn't fill the silence with comfort. She just sat with it. The fire going, the wind outside, the two of us with our coffee cups in the warm room. She sat with the weight of what I'd said and let it be what it was, and that was the right thing. I did not need comfort. I needed someone to sit alongside it with me, not diminish it. We stayed up late that storm night, later than I had stayed up talking to anyone in years. In February, Hawk Wing came. He came alone, early morning on his big buckskin. He tied the horse at the post and I went out to meet him, and he stood there looking at the cabin with an expression I could not fully read, not disapproval, not surprise, something more neutral and watchful. We went inside. Clara was at the kitchen end. She acknowledged him with a nod and poured coffee for three without being asked, and then found work at the far end of the room with a discretion that was not retreat. Just understanding. She had a kind of social intelligence that came from watching people, I think, from a lifetime of reading rooms. Hawk Wing drank his coffee. He said the usual things, the winter, what was happening on the reservation, news from the north. And then he said, "I hear you have a woman here." I said, "Clara Voss. She's been here since November." He looked at me. He has his mother's eyes dark and full, but with a steadiness behind them that is his own. He said, "Your wife's people might think it soon." I told him Bright Water had been gone 5 years. He said 5 years wasn't so long. I said, "Hawk Wing, 5 years." He was quiet. He finished his coffee. He looked toward the kitchen where Clara had her back to us, working at something, and he looked back at me and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She works." Not a question, an observation. I said, "Yes." He said, "The horses look good." I said, "Yes." He nodded. He put down his cup and stood up, and I walked him out to his horse. At the post he stopped and said, not looking at me, "You look different." I asked him how. He said, "Like yourself." Then he got on his horse and rode north. I stood there in the cold watching him go, and I understood what he meant. In the months since the hunt, since the broken bow, since Clara, something had reoriented in me. I had been sitting slightly sideways of my own life, the way you sit after a loss, turned a little away from everything, and now I was squared up again. Present, in my own body. I went back inside. I want to tell you about the morning I knew. It was early March, a warm day, the first genuinely warm day, the kind that hits you with its unexpectedness, the air soft after months of cold, the ground still hard but the sky a particular blue. I was in the east pasture checking the fence line, and I came back across the creek to find Clara in the corral with Black Mud, the roan mare. She had the mare on a long line, and she was working her in a slow circle, changing direction, keeping the mare's attention. But she was doing the water crossing work, not with water, but with a tarp on the ground, getting the mare accustomed to something strange underfoot, something she couldn't understand. It was a step I hadn't tried. I had been working on the water itself, and Clara had quietly come at it from further back, from the root of the problem, which was not the water at all but the mare's distrust of uncertain footing. I stood at the fence and watched. The mare was nervous. She kept stopping, tossing her head, wanting to go around the tarp. Clara kept the line loose, not pulling, not demanding, just making the tarp easy to investigate and the departure from it not so easy. Patient, still, waiting the mare out without pressure. After a long while the mare put one foot on the tarp, then two. She stood there and nothing bad happened. Then she walked across it. Clara stood still and let the mare feel the absence of consequence. Then she walked the mare around and brought her back across. 4 more times, until the mare was walking across the tarp without stopping, without the head toss, her ears still flicking but her body calm. Clara didn't see me until she had put the mare away and come out through the corral gate. She looked up and found me leaning on the fence post. She stopped. She said, "How long have you been there?" I said, "Long enough." She waited, looking at me, her breath visible in the cool air. I said, "I want to offer you something, and I want you to hear it without feeling you have to be gracious about it." She said, "All right." I said, "The land here is mine and the cabin, and there is a piece of ground on the south side of the creek where the drainage is good and the soil is what it should be. I had thought years ago of building a second structure there. A proper house. Not large, but right good timber, a real fireplace, a floor that doesn't let the cold up through it in January." I said, "I would build it if you would stay." She looked at me for a moment, not surprised. I don't think she was surprised, not flustered. She was taking it in, giving it the weight it deserved, the way she gave everything its proper weight. She said, "That would be a home." I said, "Yes." She said, "Not a favor, not charity." I said, "No, you have been here 4 months. You have done the work of a partner and taken the shelter of a guest. That is an imbalance I want to correct." She was quiet for a moment. There was something crossing her face that was more than the decision itself. She was sorting through what she was agreeing to and what she wasn't, what kind of a thing this was between us, named or not. She was not a woman who agreed to things without understanding what she was agreeing to. Then she said, "I'll stay." Simple as that. We started the house in April, when the ground was workable again. I put it where I had said, on the south side of the creek, on the good ground. I staked the corners myself one cold April morning, pacing the dimensions, driving the stakes with a mallet while she watched and made suggestions about the orientation and the placement of the windows. She had clear ideas about light. She wanted the main window facing east for the morning, and the back wall angled toward the hill for shade in the high summer heat. I thought about both, and she was right about both. 2 of Hawk Wing's younger brothers came for the timber raising, Crow Feather and Spotted Knife, both in their 20s, strong and willing. They came for 3 days and worked hard and did not make anything of the situation, which told me Hawk Wing had spoken to them before they came. On the second evening, Clara cooked a supper that stopped conversation for a while, the kind of meal that makes men go quiet out of something close to gratitude. And afterward Crow Feather said something low in Lakota to his brother and Spotted Knife laughed, and I asked Crow Feather what he'd said. He told me. He said this woman cooks like she intends to stay a long time. I said she does. The house went up over 6 weeks. I worked it steadily, a few hours each morning after the horses were fed, and Clara worked beside me on the things that required patience more than strength. She learned to use a draw knife on the logs. She had opinions about the chinking and about the height of the doorway and about the pitch of the porch roof, and her opinions were mostly right, and I incorporated them without ceremony because that was the right thing to do. I built her a good fireplace. That took me a week, working the stone carefully, mortaring each course, getting the draw right so it would pull clean in any wind. She came to look at it when it was done and ran her hand along the mantel stone, which I had smoothed and squared as careful as I knew how to do. She said, "You did this right." I said, "I have done it before, but not for a while and not for a reason." She looked at me. She said, "It's good to have a reason." The day she moved into the house, the end of May, the cottonwoods full green, the creek running clear over the limestone, the whole world smelling of new warmth. I carried the last of her things across the footbridge I had built, which had 8 boards and rope handrails and a level footing I had graded myself from the south bank to the north. She brought the trunk. I brought the crate and the rolled blankets. We set the last things down inside the house, which smelled of new wood and fresh stone, and the cottonwood smoke from the first fire I'd lit that morning to drive out the cold and the smell of new chinking. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around. She turned once, slowly, taking the whole of it in. The east window with the light coming in warm and level. The fireplace with its good draw. The plank floor I had laid careful, fitted tight. The low shelf along the south wall that I had built for her without telling her, a surprise, something I had decided on my own and done on a morning she was busy elsewhere. She stopped when she saw the shelf. She went to it and ran her hand along the edge of it. She turned and looked at me. She said, "You built that for me." I said, "You had nowhere to put your books." She had 3 books. She had kept them wrapped in oilcloth in the wagon the day she arrived, the most carefully protected things she owned. She brought them out now and set them on the shelf, one by one, straightening each one so the spines faced the room. She stepped back and looked at them there on the shelf in her house. Then she turned and she came to me, not rushing, just moving the few steps across the room, and she put her hand flat against my chest. Not embracing, not yet. Just her hand there, feeling, I think, the steadiness of me, the fact of me standing in the room she lived in. She looked up at me, dark eyes, the set of her face. The cut on her chin was long healed, just a faint line now, something you'd miss if you weren't looking. She said, "You are a good man, Broken Elk." Not a compliment in the way people use that word. A plain statement. The kind you make when you have looked at something honestly for a long time and seen clearly what it is. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my chest. Her hand was warm and smaller than mine and completely still, not trembling, not tentative. Just resting there like something that had found where it belonged. I said, "You gave me back my bow." She said, "You gave me back everything else." The bow hangs on the wall of my lodge now, above the fireplace where the morning light reaches it first. The repair is visible if you know to look, a slight thickening at the crack, the sinew wrap Clara did, tighter on the outside curve where the stress would concentrate. I look at it every morning when I get up to start the fire. I don't hunt with it anymore. I don't need to, and I'm honest enough with myself to know what that means and to be at peace with it. The bow is what it is now, which is a different thing than what it was. It is my father's bow, started by his hands and finished by mine and repaired by a woman who knew what she was doing and understood why it mattered. That is enough for it to be. More than enough. Clara's house is across the footbridge. Every morning in fair weather she is on her porch by the time I am on mine, and we drink our coffee in the early light watching the east come up over the hills. Sometimes we call across to each other. Sometimes we don't. The silence between us is comfortable, which is a thing that takes real time and does not happen by accident or by wanting it to. The roan mare, Black Mud, crosses water now. Not every time, not always without hesitation, but she crosses. She'll go through a creek at a reasonable pace if you give her a moment to look at it first. Clara worked on it through the spring and into the summer, patient and unhurried, and now the mare will cross without the whole fight of before. Something that had been wrong for a long time getting slowly right. Hawk Wing came back in the fall. He came with 2 of the young men and stayed for 2 days. He sat with Clara at supper the first evening and she told him about her father's horses, and he told her about the hunts from when he was young, not the hunts of now, but the real ones, the hunts he had been part of as a boy before everything changed. And I sat at the end of the table and listened to the 2 of them talk and felt what it feels like to have a home. Not a cabin, not a structure. The thing itself. He was leaving on the second morning and he stopped at his horse and said to me, low, with the younger men out of earshot, "She sees you." I knew what he meant. I said yes. He nodded once, he said good. Got on his horse and rode north. I am 65 now, this winter, sitting beside my fire with the bow above the mantel, and the creek frozen outside, and the smoke from Clara's chimney rising straight in the still cold air across the footbridge. I lost many things. My people's world first, slowly, that loss took years and is still not fully finished. Then bright water. Then the sense of my own place in the order of things, among the men I'd lived alongside. I was a man whose bow broke on a stumble in a prairie dog hole, and who was helped onto his horse by a nephew with careful, pitying hands, and I had lived for some time with what that felt like. A wagon came slow down the road one cold November morning. A woman with a cut on her chin and steady hands looked at me without alarm from the bench of a loaded farm wagon, and I told her to bring it around to my barn, and everything after that was just what happened. She is on her porch now in the early morning. I can see her from mine across the creek. She has her coffee, and she is looking east at the hills, and the horses are moving in the east pasture, and the footbridge stands between our two fires. She looks over, and I lift my cup. She lifts hers. That's all, that's the whole of it.